Um, Hi, everyone. Before we begin, I'll share a few procedural notes before we dive into our panel. So the chat function, as you notice, has been disabled for this panel. Throughout the discussion, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions for our panelists. And we'll set aside some dedicated time at the end of the webinar and the panel to address audience questions. A short survey will appear at the end of the panel, and we really value your feedback as it shapes the future of AVA panels and webinars and talk about other topics. And today's webinar panel is being recorded and it will be posted to Ava's YouTube channel shortly so you can revisit, share the session as well as Ava's previous webinars and panels, and that link will be shared momentarily. So to dive in, hi everyone, welcome to the Alliance Against Violence Webinar Wednesdays. My name is Alexandria Lazochek and I'll be your host today. I'm a master's student at the University of Calgary in community health sciences, specializing in population and public health. I also serve as the AVA online coordinator and the host of the Her Health podcast. And I'm joining you today from the traditional and ancestral territory of Treaty 7. Mohkinstsis, or also known as the City of Calgary, is also home to Métis Nations of Alberta, including the Nose Hill Métis District 5 and the Elbow Métis District 6. And on behalf of AVA, I would like to begin by acknowledging that at a national level, we encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the lands on which they live, work, or visit, and commit to becoming engaged allies together. We also acknowledge that as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and their rights and responsibilities related to culture, language, and the pursuit of wellness. Today's discussion is centered on early career research, a critical and often defining stage in an academic's research career. Early career researchers, also known as ECRs, are navigating the transition into independent scholarship while balancing competing demands related to teaching, research, funding, service, and personal well-being to top it all off. And for many ECRs, this period is marked by both opportunity and uncertainty. And it's a time of building research programs, establishing professional identities, forming mentorship networks, and learning how to work within and sometimes challenge academic and institutional systems. And these experiences are often intensified for those working in high need and equity oriented research areas such as gender based violence, trauma, mental health, sexual and reproductive health, and community engaged research. And throughout this panel, AVA aims to create a space for this honest dialogue about what it means to be an ECR today, including the challenges, the success, strategies, and supports that shape an ECR's journey. And this conversation also reflects AVA's broader commitment to training, mentorship, equity, and building capacity and to supporting researchers who want to advance the work that they do in the health and wellness of girls, women, and gender diverse people. So I first want to thank everyone for joining today. I don't have your intros in here. I thought I did, but we'll start with go ahead. So I first have Dr. Kara Ross. Do you mind talking a little bit about yourself and introducing yourself to the space today?
A quick introduction, right? So
Yes,
just,
please.
okay, so my background is in health psychology. I study both maternal child health, how psychosocial factors, including adversity and the like, can get under the skin to affect health during that period. I also do community oriented research to help build capacity in community. And I'm an associate professor at Athabasca University. And I don't think, I was part of the first cohort of ECRs with AVA.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's really glad to have you in the space today. And then I also have Dr. Sarah Yursich today, if you don't mind speaking about yourself for a little bit.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My broader discipline is criminology. I'm faculty in the sociology and criminology department, and I'm also the chair currently of a women's and gender studies department, coming to the end of my 3 year stint at that. I am a teaching professor at Capilano University, and I'm also the co-director of the Frida Center for Research on Violence Against Women, Children, and Gender Diverse Individuals at Simon Fraser University. And I joined AVA through a Frida partnership with other centers that are involved in AVA. And I believe I was in the second cohort of ECR's care. Is that right?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for introducing yourself and entering the space with us today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Ashley Stewart-Tefescu, a registered social worker and assistant professor in the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. I also have the privilege of serving as chair of AVA's National Tragic Mentorship Program and the Community Agency Internship Program as an ECR. As I'm out of the country and in a different time zone, I'm not able to join you live today, but I really do welcome the opportunity to share my experiences with the AVA ECR program via this recording.
And then last, but certainly not least, we have our newest ECR, Dr. Jennifer Collins, if you don't mind speaking a little bit today.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Jennifer. I am an assistant professor at the Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador with the Faculty of Nursing. My research delves into like gender perspectives for women living with multiple sclerosis in Canada. So I've done some research really for chronic illness, but a focus on like neurodegenerative. And then I also do some arts-based work as well. Like I'm a professional artist. That's kind of bled into like my research life a little bit over the years. So I mostly do research with people with like multiple sclerosis or dementia. Yeah, so that includes disability and episodic disability as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for getting a chance to introduce yourself and enter the space today. I really appreciate it. I guess we're going to dive in today about our questions of kind of about ECR identity in these pathways. So to begin, let's start with Kara. Can you share a bit about your journey as an ECR and what led you into your current research area? And how do you personally define being an ECR at this stage of your career?
That's a lot in one question. It is. Um, so thinking about what led me into my current research area at this stage, so the probably the most defining difficult hurdle to overcome for me was you have to find an independent research gig in order to start this journey. You have to find a faculty position. And that is a bit of a challenge unto itself, as I'm sure a lot of people on the call know. There's not a ton of research positions open. If you want to do research on top of teaching, that can, usually have to bend over backwards a little bit to find it. If you've got geographic restrictions, I mean, that can be fun as well. And finding a department that's looking at for you, like that is interested in the work that you're doing is a bit of a challenge. So it might be a bit tongue in cheek, but to be honest, I was, thanks to some of the amazing mentorship I had, I was raring to hit the ground running. And I just needed someplace where I could hit the ground. And getting that position was probably the hardest part, just to get this journey started. Um, what led me into my current research area? Oh gosh, that could be a talk unto itself. Um, I started off with very basic focused research looking at maternal child health and how those psychosocial factors get under the skin. And then I started to question impact. Are we actually doing the research that's actually going to go out into the community and have an impact? And luckily, I started working with Nicole and Ava and have had an opportunity to actually do some of that more community focused work. Um, and how do I personally define being an ECR? Uh, well, from a practical perspective, that's usually defined as within 5 years of your your first appointment. Although there are some places like the Canadian Psychological Association that define it relative to when you got your PhD. But basically, you're a baby independent researcher. You've got all this training from your graduate stuff, your postdoc stuff, but the training wheels are kind of off now, and you're taking your first little wobbly circles around the cul-de-sac. So it's really focused on starting to develop a foundation of an independent research program. And I'm in an odd place for this panel because I'm been here long enough. I started my first job in 2019, so technically I'm transitioning out of the ECR phase and I'm kind of mid-career, but I will let someone else talk.
Thank you so much, Kara. I know that a lot of other like individuals are going to say very similar things to like how they personally define as an ECR, but I'm very curious about how you what a bit about your journey, Sarah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of where I started, how I got where I am is I went into my PhD really just wanting to teach because I had been teaching with a master's and I knew that wasn't really a sustainable career. And then I joined SFU to do my PhD in criminology, and I ran into Margaret Jackson, who runs the Frida Center. And she and I got to talking and she's like, come be a research assistant, come start doing research. I'm like, well, I guess that's part of the package, even if I just want to teach. And then through work at Frida, I really fell in love with research. And I started doing research on high risk, lethal, and nearly lethal violence through collaboration and all these different pieces. And just as a general sort of category where my work falls under, I do look at gender-based violence and violence against women and children. And it was first and foremost domestic homicide work, but it has really expanded into something that has a community impact. And I think it's very similar to Kara, where through both Frida and then also getting involved in AVA, I was able to shift that lens for myself, where I stopped just looking at research for the sake of knowing and shifted to research for the sake of community impact, betterment, safety and security, reducing barriers to help seeking, all these different pieces that would do something like prevent domestic homicide versus just looking at it. Because what we know is that domestic homicide is fully and completely preventable, and it's system errors that get to it. So it took a working with community-oriented academics, which I got through both Frida and also Ava with Nicole, to make me shift my perspective. And I found that really helpful. And as for the third part of the question, that was about an experience as an ECR, right? Or how I define it.
Yeah, at this stage of your career, how would you
Yeah.
define an ECR? Yeah.
Well, I think being an ECR is a very chaotic time in our lives. And I have a teaching intensive position, so balancing a very robust research dossier is not the right word, but a research agenda and also teaching at a very teaching intensive university, which don't get me wrong, I love. It's a lot to do. And but something like being an ECR and being involved in AVA has helped me really sort of get that time to be around research motivated people to collaborate. And so I think in a way, being an early career researcher is chaotic and unpredictable. And sometimes there's highs and sometimes there's very stressful lows and everything in between because you're just getting your footing in something so different after being a student for such a large, like a long part of your life. But something like Ava and this actually helps because then you meet people who are at the same stage in their journeys and you have a collaborative team and it eases the chaos. And I think it helps you in that transition as you become an early career researcher and as you move toward mid-career, like Kara.
Thank you so much for giving a chance to discuss about your journey and has led you to your current research area. I truly appreciate it.
So, just to tell you a little bit about my journey as an ECR, to start, my research really sits at the nexus of adverse childhood experiences and gender-based violence. And my path into this work has really been shaped by the desire to understand how those early experiences influence health and social outcomes across the life course. I was drawn to this intersection because, as we know, adversity and violence don't occur in isolation. There's often shared risk pathways, overlapping impacts, and not to mention the broader societal and structural conditions that shape both exposure and our response, as well as prevention efforts. What motivates me is the idea that research can do more than simply describe a problem. Rather, it can really inform our prevention efforts, strengthen health and social systems of support, and contribute to more equitable policy and practice. So I'm especially interested in research in this area that's trauma-informed and equity-oriented, work that's methodologically rigorous while still being responsive to the realities of individuals and communities. So at this stage in my career, I define being an ECR as the transition from primarily contributing to existing programs of research that were led by my mentors and more senior colleagues, and this was particularly true in my postdoc, to now building a more coherent and expansive independent program of research on my own. And it doesn't say that I don't work with my mentors and colleagues anymore. Of course I do, but I'm more the one who's leading the conceptualization of that work, of course, in collaboration. And this stage as an ECR is really where I think I would describe it as you're clarifying your niche. You're trying to develop your clear research agenda, you're strengthening and expanding partnerships, and you're also learning how to lead and mentor while still being mentored yourself. And this is critical and something that participating in AVA as an ECR has done for me.
And then, Jennifer, would you like to take a moment to kind of explain your journey as an ECR and
Yeah.
at this stage, how you define an ECR? Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I guess mine goes back a little bit. Like my background's a registered nurse. In nursing, I feel like we're in a privileged position in society where we bear witness to the experiences of others. I had transitioned out of what was my dream job because of a diagnosis with a disability. So I was an OR trauma nurse, and that was where I wanted to spend my career. I wanted to transition to research and academia as a retired nurse. So this was something I was really actually hoping to do much later in life. And, life kind of pushed me in the direction, I guess maybe it was meant to be. So I went to graduate school and started, I guess, like that journey to becoming an ECR. And with that, I found an amazing clinical area to support my graduate studies where I was working in biotherapies. And with that, I was working with people with immune mediated illnesses. So multiple sclerosis was the primary disease, I guess that you would say I was working with. So infusion therapy, but the cornerstone of my nursing practice and with the people I was caring for, they'd be really long and lengthy, like therapeutic relationships. So that's when I first observed that there was such a gender difference between the men that I was caring for and the women. And for those that aren't aware, like we have a very high rate of MS, multiple sclerosis in Canada, and it impacts women at a 3-to-1 ratio. So I actually couldn't find the information that I felt I needed as a registered nurse to best inform my care. That led me down a very long trajectory where I'm still as an ECR, really exploring that with my research. So it is really showing, like health as relational, and it is something where gender-based violence and IPV can really interplay. MS is also one of the most disabling conditions. So when we think about that, after 10 years, 90% of people with MS experience some form of disability or episodic disability, so including invisible. And even just with that intersectional consideration, there can be a very heightened risk for IPV. So connecting with AVA has really helped shape my thinking, even just with like how I approach interviews. And as an ECR, you're a sponge. Yeah, and so it's just a quick plug for nursing because people are saying, oh, it's really hard to get a position. We need positions. We have so many that are open. So maybe if you're someone who's interested in nursing and that trajectory, that's actually one of the few areas in academia where there's lots of opportunity. We need you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for entering the space, Jennifer, and talk. I love to see all the different journeys that's led to an ECR. So I'm really glad a chance to talk to all three of you about that and kind of see that the overlying lapping of community impact and seeing all those differences and caring about community. I truly appreciate all of you talking about that today. To shift gears a little bit, to not get too negative, I'm curious about what have you found the most challenging about that transition into an independent research or faculty role, particularly in balancing that teaching, the research, the service, and personal well-being all on top of all the tasks that you have to do already as an ECR. Sir, would you mind starting us off about what you think about that?
That's, I wish I would have more sage advice for people who are entering early career. I don't think balance exists, and I try very hard, but it kind of ebbs and flows in my life because when you're an early career researcher, you have like peak times where teaching and grading and course prep, especially course prep, just takes up so much time. And then when you're working in a research center like I do, you also have grant cycles and deliverables you have to worry about. And there's all these different things where there's no, there are times where I have great space in my life and there are times where I don't. And so I guess the balance is in between taking good enough care of myself when I have the time to do it, that when there's a week or two or a month where things are just busy, you're writing grants, you're prepping courses, you're doing all these things, that you've recharged your batteries enough and you also carve out little spaces. So for me, it's always been about little spaces, I think, where I've tried all the different things. I've tried timing, I've tried blocking off time, I've tried, Pomodoro timers, like all the different things people tell you to do. None of them worked for me. So what I always do is I make sure that I have at least one weekend day off, and I make sure that I don't work past 6 p.m. unless something really pressing is happening. So I find pockets of time to rest, to process, to do all the things we need to do. But I guess my what I'm speaking to, or in some, is that when you enter academia as an early career researcher, striving for balance and well-being is so incredibly important, but don't be hard on yourself if or when you can't find it. Because I finished my PhD in 2021 and I still have yet to know what like balance is. But I've made the chaos work and I know the ebb and flow now of sort of like the cycles of when I'm going to get busy so that I can plan for that. Does that answer the question?
Definitely. It talks about one of those I think the most challenging part of like transitioning into early career researchers is that there's so many opportunities. I think as a master's student, you want to say yes to everything, but unfortunately you are so restricted by time. So I really do appreciate that you got a chance to discuss that. Well-being is really important. Sometimes you just won't have the time to do it, but to be cognizant of what the best strategies are for you when doing everything else in your life and your work. So thank you so much for diving into that. Kara, do you have any thoughts about what was the most challenging during your transition into an ECR?
Well, first of all, I echo everything that Sarah just said. I mean, I don't know about the other ECRs, but you go in from grad training where you're mostly like learning about stuff and doing research. And then suddenly you have this role where now, on top of all that, which was already a lot, you have to do teaching and service. And it can be a bit of a I don't know if there's a way to prepare someone other than to be aware that that's coming down the pipeline. And you're going to have to figure out how to rebalance that. And the stuff around boundaries, like knowing that I'm going to have this amount of time off. I'm not going to be checking my email after this time. I think those are all, and those are all amazing. Um, One of the hardest things that I found was figuring out how to get the snowball rolling. So it's when you're more independent and now you're like doing things on your own rather than with your a graduate mentor. Um, in terms of like getting the funding, starting to establish yourself as an independent researcher, getting those first students, especially getting that snowball rolling if you're in a non-traditional research type role, which is funny because that's most of the roles in academia are non-traditional. But I had to figure out how to navigate. There was a right way that I was taught to do research coming from that more traditional research intensive type background. And then when I tried to translate that into where I landed, which is, it's a research university, but it has its very strong roots in its teaching background and it's still transitioning into a research institution. And it doesn't necessarily have the same sort of resources as like one of the U15s in Canada. I realized that some of the advice that I was getting from my mentors didn't necessarily translate. And then I had to like not only figure this out, but then what does balance look like for me? Can I be spitting out a grant every 6 months if I also have to teach all the time? It's sort of things like that. Like maybe this is going to take me a little bit longer to do. I will say though that once you figure out how to get the snow, as being the more senior on this panel, which is a little alarming, I will say that once you figure out how to get the snowball rolling, it's easier to keep it rolling. So having that first chaotic period, if you can stick through it, things do tend to get a little bit better. I also find that with the ECR, one of the challenges is that Sarah was talking about chaos as well. It's kind of like that neurodevelopmental thing where kids, when their brains, they make a lot of connections and there's a period of pruning. I kind of feel like that's what the ECR phase is. You've got a lot of connections and opportunities, and then at some point there's going to be a pruning period that happens to simplify things. In terms of balance, I'm still trying to figure that out too. Uh, one of the one of the things that I try to do is, as much as possible, make sure that I'm trying to work smarter, not harder. So trying to make sure that there's overlap between my teaching and my service and my research. So those aren't separate things. They kind of bleed into each other. And that's one of the reasons why I've been focusing on developing an honors-like course at AU because I've been developing a pipeline for our students. So now let's see if we can actually build in a pipeline for our students so they can support research and get research training. And now is there a way that I can formalize that in terms of a course? In terms of well-being, gosh, um, you do have to love what you do, I think. If you're coming into academia to get rich, you're probably going to be incredibly disappointed. So being passionate about what you're doing and doing the things that help you love your job is great. I echo what's been said about making sure that you're finding time, though, to stop and reflect and being clear about those boundaries as well. Um, and yeah, there are natural ebbs and flows in the career. So being aware that sometimes it might be like, holy crap, I am barely holding on to the roller coaster. And then there are other times where it's like, okay, I can breathe and reflect a little bit more. And if you're starting to get too much towards I'm clinging to the roller coaster, then that's a sign that you might need to trim. And that's paying attention to that as well. I think that was the whole question. Did I miss anything?
I think you did a fabulous job about just all
Okay.
the challenges when it comes into there are so many opportunities, again, taking care and knowing that once you get the ball rolling, you'll get the ball rolling. And if you're
Mhm.
passionate about what you do, it's going to be for the better. We've all are all in community research because we want to see positive impacts in community. So I think that's really well
Yeah.
said as well, is that you have to be
Well,
passionate.
well, and just before, it's one of the things that I'm learning is that it sucks, but learning how to say no and learning when to maybe pause a collaboration are really, even though it feel you want to do everything, it's an important skill, unfortunately. But yes.
Definitely. I'm still trying to figure out how to say no as well. Someone that wants to do everything. So I'm still learning that as well.
Reflecting on the challenges I faced transitioning into an independent research and faculty role, for me, I would say the most challenging part of that transition is simply how quickly the scope of your job and your responsibilities expand. You're simultaneously building your research program, you're writing and you're publishing, you're developing grant applications. You're also now supervising trainees. For myself, that's at the undergraduate and graduate level. You're teaching, and in my case, our teaching load is quite high, and you're teaching often courses you've never taught before, so that requires a lot of development and prep. And you're also taking on faculty and university and community service commitments. And that was really surprising how much time and effort that took. So you're doing all of that while you're still trying to establish your professional identity and create your own networks. So I often describe this experience as really trying to take a sip of water from a fire hose. It requires a lot of skill, otherwise, you can get overwhelmed very, very quickly. One of the biggest practical challenges for me has been around time management and actually something I refer to as time fragmentation. The work that moves a research program forward, all of that writing, analysis, strategic grant development, for me, and I would argue for everyone, that requires deep, sustained focus. But the schedule and my schedule can easily become dominated by meetings, urgent tasks, like I can't tell you how many reference letters I've had to do with 12 hours notice from students, and then all those teaching related responsibilities that are time bound. So the transition often feels like learning not only how to do more, but how to protect the kind of time that allows deep work to happen. And in all honesty, I'm still trying to find this balance 5 years in. In this field, I would say there's also an emotional dimension to this work when we study adverse childhood experiences and gender-based violence. So it's important to think about that emotional energy and then your own mental health, both for our researchers who we're doing research with and for our trainees. So I think to make this sustainable for me, it involves being really proactive, building trauma-informed practices in your research, creating supportive supervision structures like we do with AVA, really being strict about setting those professional boundaries, and then also staying connected to peers and mentors that you enjoy working with. Not that you just align with your research programs, but that you enjoy collaborating with them as individuals. And I also try to prioritize for me physical activity as self-care. Even if it's 15, 20 minutes a day, I really try and prioritize that. I wish I could say I don't work evenings and weekends, but that would be a lie. But eventually, post tenure, and as I move beyond being an ECR, I'm hoping to protect more of that time.
Jennifer, I know that you're in your ECR, you're kind of new to this space as well. Are there any current challenges, or you could talk about idea things that have already happened into this transition into
Yeah.
this like more research role?
Yeah, so I think maybe like out of the three of us, I can like absolutely, agree with every sentiment that's been said. But I entered academia in my ECR position in a tenure track position during the height of the pandemic, before we had vaccines. And this was a time where post-secondary, any kind of educational institution, like resources were strapped. People were stressed, and so it added a unique flavor to my experience, I have to say. I think like most people at the time, like there could be some components when you're switching to a role like that, like, and then I moved across the country to a brand new place for me. So there were components that were isolating, but I find peace sometimes, like, not like sometimes I love my own company, so I don't know, maybe that can add into the last one, but I love the company of others too. So I found that there was a lot of highly independent learning, hyper independent learning over grant writing. This is something that it's not necessarily a skill you're going to get out of a PhD. It's something that you need to, take courses on, seek mentorship. But with that being said, I was very fortunate with the institution where I am, because we have exceptional support within my faculty from like our now former AD of research is now our dean, and she's so intensively research supportive, and so I had great support with that, wonderful support with our grant facilitator. I think she has made some strong grant writers out of a lot of the faculty. I hope one day I can classify myself that way too, but I wouldn't want to toot my own horn. But and I say that with a smile, but just know there was a few hundred hours of like stressful like integration over grant writing, and that was the big challenge for me. So but you get there, and I thought that it's to me it's really seeking out that connection, that relational mentorship. I've had that, through my institution, I've had that through my leadership, I've had that with other faculty members, and I do that as well with my teaching and service. So I'm not someone who has a hard time saying no. I don't know if that's a bad thing, or it's like I don't like to bite off more than I can chew, because I know it stresses me out so much. I've had periods in my life where I've done that, and so I'm at a stage in my career where I'm almost finished with the ECR role. I'm also moving into like my mid career, because we could get into academia at any point in time, really, in our lives. And I do think that yeah, I think knowing my limitations, and I'm at a point now where I protect my peace more than I'm looking for those new collaborations. Collaborations to me is an area that I've had some exceptional mentorship. Again, a lot of that like relational learning. I've had to seek those out independently. I connected with AVA fairly independently, and so it's that's something that's really helped mitigate a lot of the challenges, whether they're interpersonal, grant writing, different things that you do face as an ECR. And I have a thing that has really helped me. I don't know if it would help anyone else on if you're looking at becoming, like a tenured track researcher. It's something where there's a lot of people that are smart out there. I seek collaborations that are kind. And so that's very important to me. And that actually leads into my well being. I can learn a lot from anybody, but I learn best from people that I feel like there's mutual kindness and respect. And that's very important to me. More important than a list of publications, if I'm being honest. And so I think AVA has exceptionally kind people, and it's that relational mentorship that really does help, leading into well-being and your work-life balance and all of that. Again, I'm at an institution where that was mentioned up front in my interview from the interim dean, or sorry, acting dean at the time. So it is something where I would say don't ever shy away from universities outside of the U15. I think it's been a beautiful experience that way, where I don't have perfect work-life balance. I'm still figuring that out. But when it comes to well-being, mean, I feel like with my work life, I really focus on the glimmers. So, like the small moments through my day, like a hot cup of coffee, hygge, where you're all cozied up in a nice warm sweater. I work a lot from my home office. Yeah, warm cups of coffee, and yeah, just those little things like the sun shining in your window. Like I just kind of try to find the beauty in the day to day of it. And yeah, and also take on your vacation to conferences.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you for talking about the challenges. I also heard that you mentioned moving as well as part of that transition, which I do not envy whatsoever. That is a actual physical barrier that would have definitely added to the stress. So thank you for talking about your life as well as you're transitioning into this new role, because that does happen to a lot of people. So I appreciate you talking about that. I also really do appreciate that you talked about having really strong relational partnerships and collaborations that are kind, just talking to nonprofit organizational leaders, a little bit different. They always mention that they really want collaborative and kind partnerships. So I was really glad to hear that from different areas that that is a overall sentiment with this conversation. So thank you so much. I was doing a little bit of research into early career researchers because I didn't really know what exactly that looked like. And they kind of mentioned that like teaching releases are often framed as a form of protected time. So let me know if that is correct or not as we have this conversation. And from your perspectives, how can a teaching release meaningfully support an ECR, trainings like research development or long-term career sustainability? Jennifer, would you be okay to start with this question?
Absolutely. Like I'm very fortunate where with AVA, I was able to accept a 1 point teaching release. So I still have a very heavy 4 point. Like I think in different institutions look different. Again, I'm in a professional practice program, so I we do have a high level of I guess responsibilities, and sometimes they're the responsibilities we place on ourselves in our teaching roles. So I like to make myself, very available to students, and I do think that yeah, it can certainly it could take a toll with the teaching. It's something I find I need to sort of empathetically recover from at the end of a semester. So I think even just having a little bit less of that to be able to focus on some research time, it's not uncommon for ECRs, especially in the first year or two. Like I talk to other people just to feel like their teaching takes up most of their time, no matter what it's weighted as. So I do think that the teaching release has really enabled me to focus so much more on my grant writing, to get like my first tri-council grant successfully. And Ava was supportive with that. So, I mean, there's so many good things that could be said about that. I think it does promote a little bit more of, I can't really say like the work-life balance, but your full balance within your workload. It can become a little bit more, um, I don't know, it enables you to engage more with your research in a way that you need more time as an ECR for that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. Sarah, did you have anything else to add about teaching releases and how it could be meaningful to support ECR training?
I would say, so for context, I'm at a teaching focused university, and our ability to do research just started to develop around the time I joined the faculty. So 2021-ish. I was there since 2019, but PhD 2021-ish. They started really pushing for research, but research in the absence of release, right? So it's a teaching focused university. I know across the country those look different. I know in Ontario, for example, you would teach us six. So six courses across the academic year. I have to teach eight. So four in fall and four in spring. And overseeing a research center on the side of that, no matter how much I love Frida, it does sit on the side of my desk. And it still does because there's no release package with that. But having a research opportunity and to work with such a powerhouse like Nicole, and also to work with AVA, which is this huge, amazing network where I have such fantastic connections and opportunities, it has been life saving and life changing. And I know it doesn't sound a lot when I'm like, oh, I've gone down from 8 classes to 7. Let me tell you, one less class is huge. It's when we're talking about balance, I guess it has in a way introduced more balance into my life. where I have this carved out time now that my university's like, you don't have to teach, you can just work and research. And it's been life-changing, I would say. And I think for a lot of ECRs too, where you have this pressure, I know my pressure is different because I don't have as much pressure to produce like scholarship wise, although I still do. Um, when you first start, you have to stay on target with publishing, you have to stay on target with research, you have to demonstrate excellence in teaching and do a ton of service and do all these things that set you apart because you're going up for promotion in a few years and then a few years after that. And then you're surrounded by other colleagues who they are well past that part of their career. So they just come in, they write when they want to, they teach what they want to. And it's really hard to see where you are and how you would get to a point where you have a little bit more stability. And so having a release every year it's given me the ability to do what I want to do while still keeping up with high quality teaching work. And I'm so grateful for it, if that answers the question.
Definitely. I'm glad to hear a different perspective about just having more uh like training and education focused schools and how they kind of accommodate with that as well as the research part. So I'm really glad to hear that different side and that perspective. Thank you so much, Sarah. And then Kara, did you want to add anything else to teaching releases and how they might be meaningful in your work?
Well, I feel like I need to start this as every like my context. Like here's something slightly different again. Um, so AU is an interesting institution because it's all online and it doesn't follow a semester system and it's asynchronous. So students start monthly and you at any given time you're going to be teaching like people started and beginning a course. And because we don't have semesters and because it's continuous, we teach all the time. So there's no gaps. And it's also very different in the sense that it's difficult to translate the workload because we split our time between what's called teaching, where you actually directly interact with students and work with them, and coordination, which is where you're like creating the courses, maintaining the courses, supporting accessibility issues and things like that. So it's a very different beast than the other types of teaching approaches. In terms of the teaching release, unfortunately, because of AU's history, I only got 1 year of teaching release because our system doesn't translate into the teaching release system. And I had to take on chair of my department in order to get that as well. So I don't know if it was, I learned a lot, but I don't know if it was like an even exchange. So I haven't been able to benefit from the teaching release part of it, although, as you know, we were able to take those funds and funnel it into a coordinator position for the aspect of AVA that I do chair AVA online. So I do appreciate its support that way. Um, so the reason I bring it up is that uh, yeah. So the teach and release experience has been slightly different for me because of the way that AU operates. Having said that, I will absolutely say that I have noticed in not only some of the research that I've done, but also just observing people over my career, that there tends to be a very strong association between having free time to do research, quelle surprise, protected time to do research, and being able to be, produce research outputs and get grants and stuff like that. It's that snowball effect. If you have more dedicated time to focus on it, you're going to have, more likely to get the snowball going and keep it going. So I can only re-echo that what everyone else has said, that this is absolutely vital in order to support early career researchers. If you are fortunate enough to land in a research position, fantastic, but those are becoming fewer and farther between. So giving especially early career researchers that dedicated space where they get to have that breath and think about, focus on their research and get that program up and going, especially at the beginning of their career where it's a foundation that's going to launch the rest of what they do. Yeah, it's priceless. You can't, yeah. So a big thank you to Ava again for giving us this opportunity because, yeah.
Thank you so much, Kara. It's really fascinating to learn that teaching releases are not a simple copy and paste from institution to institution, and just to be cognizant when going into a different institution. Of course, like if you're working for the institution, just to be aware.
Thinking about why teaching releases are important, from my perspective, a teaching release is most meaningful when it provides genuine protected time. Again, so this idea of time and time fragmentation has been really important for me. And it's time that isn't immediately absorbed by other responsibilities, often those time urgent tasks. The reason it matters is that many of the activities that shape our long-term research success don't lend themselves well to fitting into these short time blocks. So that's like things like for me, writing a manuscript, complex data analyses, grant development, or that strategic planning that's required for uninterrupted attention. So, from an ECR perspective, I see teaching release as a multiplier. It can create capacity to mentor trainees with attention, regular supervision, feedback cycles, and structured skill development in research. And that matters because mentorship is not just about guidance, it's about training in research quality. That's so important, ethics, collaboration, and also professional growth. A teaching release, from my perspective and my experience, is that it allows ECRs to build a system that can strengthen the whole research environment. So, again, developing clear team processes, trauma-informed research protocols, and thoughtful approaches to community partnership, which is critical to the work we do here at AVA and also when looking at adversity and gender-based violence. So, in terms of sustainability, I would say the benefit of a teaching release is that it can reduce overload for you at a really critical stage in career development. Those first few years in your post as a new faculty member and independent researcher are really critical for building a strong foundation. So, I find these teaching releases support momentum in ways that can compound over time, again, as a multiplier. So you're building your publication record, you're, building more competitive grant submissions, and you're really strengthening and solidifying those partnerships. And it also helps to protect your own well-being. So in a way, the teaching releases aren't just about productivity, but it's about creating that strong foundation for long-term, high-quality, ethical research work.
So thank you so much for highlighting all the different contexts, all three of you. I truly appreciate it. And to kind of talk about AVA a little bit more, AVA, one of AVA's really emphasizes mentorship and including the triadic mentorship and training across its multiple platforms. And I'm curious to hear what kind of mentorship or training has been most impactful for you as an ECR, and what are some of the gaps that still exist and we need to tackle? So Sarah, would you mind starting us off about mentorship?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really have gaps to talk about, so I'm not ignoring that part of the question. I just don't have any gaps to share. I think it's a really cool experience because with Ava, I've been able to be a mentor and also a mentee, and it's a really cool thing. Like Nicole Turner, who runs Ava, is a powerhouse, and I think I probably speak for all the ECRs here. If we could be like a fraction of what Nicole is when we get to that stage in our career, we'd be grateful. And so seeing what she does and being brought into what she's created and having the opportunity to look at grants and write grants and join big grants that other times you wouldn't, like, it's fundamentally changed how I go about doing things because I've learned from one of the best of the best. And then it's also amazing too, where, say, for example, Kara is joining mid-career, but Kara was here before me. So Kara is my colleague as an ECR, but she's also been an informal mentor through here. And I don't know if Andrea has rejoined the call, but Andrea Dean has been as well. Like, it's just you have all these people with all these different sets of expertise who come in and help you along, where you finally feel like in your PhD, you have all these resources and mentors, right? You end it, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm supposed to be a big person now at the big people table, but I liked being a kid at the big people table. And like, how do I do this? And then you get to work with all these powerful, amazing people. And I've only named a couple of them through AVA, but then you're also given the opportunity to mentor and to learn how to mentor and to be mentored on your own mentorship, I guess, which is like a weird way to say it, but it's been a really cool experience because I've also learned how to be a better mentor by being a part of the Triadic Mentorship Program and overseeing, I think now it's 3 mentees through that, and through being able to bring on research assistants for certain projects like the evidence-based research we're doing now. And it's almost like this full circle moment where I'm still able to get mentorship, but I'm now in a supported environment where I can also be a mentor. And I think it's a really cool experience.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm really glad to hear that there aren't any gaps. It's always exciting to hear when someone is actually feel they are mentored, but that also themselves get to be a mentee in every stage of their career. I really like to hear that everyone at any point could be a mentor and a mentee. So thank you so much for diving into that. How about yourself, Jennifer? Like, how that kind of, I know you mentioned a little bit about your mentorship background. Can you dive a little bit more into that?
Yeah, so I have a few really wonderful graduate research assistants that are helping me on a current project. One I've worked with now on three of my projects, so including this one. So, but I find since my involvement with AVA, I've been able to really enrich like their training and like learning opportunities. So using AVA online, encouraging them to attend webinars. I also supervise, they're referred to at the institution I'm at as MUSIP students, but they're undergraduate, essentially. They're sort of like a research assistant, but they are sometimes limited with those capabilities at that level. But it's something that I've recently had a student very interested in, including AVA as part of that role. So I think it is something where it's like I was laughing before the call because I have finished my foundations badge, which that took a fair bit amount of time, and you get a lot out of that. But I think to turn around and then say to like your GRA, hey, this was an amazing course. I just took this, and this will be great for you to understand better the type of research that we're doing, and so I think that's been really great. The whole team, like the leads meetings that we do with Dr. Laterno and everyone that's on now, like I find that I learn a lot, as Nicole has said, through osmosis. So you are kind of like that sponge or like a fly on the wall. But it's been great. I think it's helped really, like Ava's wonderful, where it's like you get so many opportunities as an ECR being invited on projects that maybe they wouldn't, I wouldn't maybe have the opportunity otherwise, where yeah, like it's just such a robust network. So I think that there's so much more probably that I'll be getting into over the years, but yeah, for right now, it's just been great.
Really glad to hear, Jennifer, and I'm very excited that you're on the team and get to absorb as much as you can from Ava. And then last but not least, we do have Kara, who's been a mentor to not only myself, but also Sarah. So do you have anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of like mentorship and training and what's been most impactful for you?
Well, this is making me blush because I don't think of myself as a mentor on this platform. I think of you all as collaborators. So I'm having a, ooh, okay. Um, what I think I tackled this question a little bit differently because when it talked about gaps, for me, this program fills a gap, like a major gap. So if I'm allowed to put my nerd hat on, and I think I am in this environment, um, there was some work that we did where we did an environmental scan of health psychologists in Canada, and we did a co-authorship network analysis to see how they were connected and what the networks look like and what drove those networks. How did they form? And one of the big things we found is that the biggest, most productive networks had at their heart, they were rooted in trainee relationships. So people that had had a chance to come together. And not only that, but specifically mentor and mentee relationships that continued even after the training was completed, long after graduate school was done, long after the thesis was done. These people were still working together. So it was really a lesson for me that even though in academia there's still this lone wolf myth that you need to go out and carve your own path and do all this sort of stuff, and it is important to have your own independent research program, nonetheless maintaining those connections to your original mentors and mentees, if that's possible, is a major lift up in your career in terms of productivity. It is really, really, really helpful having not only that senior mentor, but like a team of people like we have here at AVA who can help like put their shoulders behind that snowball again and get it rolling. You really can't. It really is, especially for an ECR when you're still trying to. There's a lot more forgiveness around. There's more people around you to catch you if you trip. There's bumpers up. You can reach out to people and be like, they might know things that are not obvious to you. So having that support is super, super helpful. And that's one of the big things about, that I really appreciate about this mentorship, the ECR, is this opportunity to, we keep saying, have that big wig in the form of Nicole, who's very willing to, support and give opportunities. But then also having access to, I mean, one of the things that I miss about graduate school a lot of ways is having a cohort, because you're kind of like, go forth. And sometimes you'll have that when you land at a certain place, but that depends on timing of like how old the other people are, where they are in their career. So it's also really nice to have an opportunity to like have a cohort again of people that I think Sarah, Jennifer, I think you both mentioned this at some point, that we're all navigating the similar things. And sometimes it's just reassuring to hear that, oh, this is normal. Okay. This is, yeah. So yeah, I really think that I really wish that there were more programs like the AVA ECR, because not everyone is lucky enough to have a mentor that can continue to move forward with them. And you know, it's such an amazing opportunity to launch your career if you've got someone who's willing to support you.
Thank you so much, Kara. Yeah, it's really good to see that we do have these connections. We want to interact and build a network with people, with like-minded individuals that are willing to collaborate in this new chapter of research and one's career trajectory. So I'm really glad to hear that your mentorship has been really impactful in the work you do, and then you still hopefully plan to mentor me once I graduate. I hope.
One of the things I most valued being an AVA ECR is the mentorship that we receive. I would say that the mentorship that's been most impactful for me has been structured, consistent, and practical. We as a team, we meet every Thursday. There's always something to discuss, and it continues to build on our momentum. And I really value that time with Dr. Letourneau and the entire team, knowing that everyone's incredibly busy, but prioritizes that team, and we consistently show up for each other. We do regular check-ins with clear goals. We're getting direct feedback on writing and grants, honest conversations about career priorities. So it's really this early career learning, it's about a strategy. It's not just a skill. I would say that traumatic mentorship, as in the AVA TMP program, is particularly valuable because it reflects the reality that no single mentor can offer you everything. So I would say having mentors with complementary strengths, different practice experiences, different methodological expertise, some from the academy, some from the community at different stages in their careers, really comes together to help you make better decisions and feel more supported. In research at the intersection of ACEs and gender-based violence, where I work, that multi-perspective mentorship is especially useful because the work touches on research, service, health, and social service systems, and policy relevance. And it often requires really, tricky ethical decision making at times. In terms of gaps, many ECRs, I think, still need support with the practical realities of research leadership. So these are things that you often don't learn in your doctoral or postdoc training. These are things like budgeting and grant management, navigating institutional systems. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how complicated that can be, and it takes a long time to learn these systems. Negotiating workload, learning how to lead teams in an effective way, and really managing things like collaboration and also even determining authorship order. In trauma and violence related research that we do specifically, there's also a gap in supports that address that secondary trauma, safety planning, and sustainable research practices. Those pieces are essential, I would argue, if we want to retain researchers to continue to do this work long term. And in violence and trauma research, really that kind of support is essential for doing good quality research, but also protecting our own well-being and health, which is critical as researchers.
To kind of shift gears a little bit, um, of course, many ECR's work is in, and especially yours works, is in complex high need areas such as gender-based violence, mental health, physical health, and health inequities as well. So I'm very curious at what unique rewards and challenges come with doing research in these spaces, especially earlier in your career or right now. So Jennifer, would you like to start us off? Because I'm very interested in the work that you do.
Well, that's so kind. I think with these series, everyone has their own, like, unique but very interesting area. Absolutely. So I guess my practice with nursing, it's always been relational. So when you say a lot of the things that are mentioned within that, like, caring for women with MS, doing infusion therapy, you would think, oh, that's just an area where, you need your ACLS, so your advanced healthcare, like for your cardiac, advanced cardiac life support. You're doing things like learning all these different programs, but really the basis of what you're doing is so relational with your nursing practice that really, like, I just remember just sitting there beside the infusion chair and just listening, and just, I think that even though that isn't where I did my research, that is where I had that foundational understanding. And I'm from an OR trauma background prior to receiving a disability diagnosis, so that is something where I love healthcare. I do love like helping others. I can bear witness to suffering, but I have to help. And so I think that when we talk about things like gender-based violence, mental health, sexual reproductive health, inequities, these are things, again, it goes back to like bearing witness, but being able to help. And so I think right now with my research contributions, it's very much participant led, like it's person led. Like I have members of my research team that are always now people with lived experience, and I would never want to conduct research without a member of my team with that. So I think, yeah, when we talk about health inequities, the unique rewards is like you get to meet some incredible people. Like every participant I speak to has such a unique experience, and finding the commonalities with that. The challenges with an area like where you're hearing sometimes some, like, just very disheartening, very sad stories. People experience a lot of pain and suffering when we talk about gender-based violence, about health inequities. So I think, yeah, just engaging in that self-care, but knowing that doing that type of work is like by shining a light on these things, we can make a difference. So I think it's like, as much as you might have that short term, I find impact where maybe you need to, like, hit the bathtub or you need to like get a good book, or something, whatever it is for self-care for you. I think that, you do have those needs, but when you take a step back, I see the hope and the light in that. And I think that, yeah, I think that again, it goes back to that relational, we can help others.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I truly appreciate it. And I think more as I enter into this research and whatnot, I hear a lot more about caregiver burnout, compassion burnout, or fatigue as well, and how that's so important when considering that the type of work and the complex research that we are in. And I think at AVA, our big motto is working together to make things better. We're in these fields because we want to make a difference, and we can see that with the work that we do. Even though some days are a lot more hard to see that than others. So thank you so much for really diving into that. I'm trying to remember who to go next. I think I'll do Kara if you want to talk a little bit about the unique rewards and the challenges that comes in doing research in the field that you do.
Well, one of the, I mean, again, a slightly different path was, like I said earlier, I came from a more traditional research, basic science type training background. So it's that, culture in academia where the researcher sets the question, the researcher is in charge, the researcher does all these sorts of things. So for me, my biggest challenge when it comes to engagement with communities is that I was learning that well after, like in my postdoc phase, like that was well after graduate school. And it is, there is a two culture problem, and it takes some maneuvering to understand that there are two cultures and you need to be aware of how that works. And then also starting to learn how to navigate those. So I was really, really grateful again with Ava and having a chance to work with Nicole, because that's something that her team does very, very well. So through this mentorship, I was able to, observe effective partner engagement with Nicole and her team, to learn how to see the two culture problem, what steps you need to think about and take as a researcher to address it. And that's all sorts of things, like understand what are the community's priorities. They're not the same as the researchers. What kind of outcomes and supports are they looking for? They don't care about your manuscripts or your impact factors and things like that. What are the unique challenges that they have? Like that there's usually a lot of turnover. You're working with people that are, they've got a lot on their plate. Like there's a lot happening here. So how can you recognize and plan for that when you're working in these contexts? How can you be a good partner? Um, and being able to shut up and listen and prioritizing the problem and the work rather than career progression. Which I mean, there are people that they're looking for the wins. That's what they're here for. But being clear that it's the problem that we're focusing on also really, really helps. In terms of, yes, commenting on some of the things that Jennifer mentioned, one of my challenges especially is that it can be brutal if you're not used to this sort of work and you come in at the first time. Bearing witness is like getting hit with a sledgehammer. I went to my first violence conference this fall, and I was not prepared for just the impact that it would have on me. Amazing research, but you're steeped in all of these stories of trauma and violence, and oh my God, how are we going to tackle this problem? This is terrible. So being prepared that it is really, really important to, as Jennifer said, you know, part of it is bearing witness that this is real and I'm going to acknowledge it and honor it. And figuring out ways, okay, how is this going to impact me? And how am I going to take care of myself with that? Um, and one of the other things that I also think is really important too with this, as I've been working with community partners, is normalize isn't the right word, but I think that sometimes we forget that this is part of the human experience too, and that a lot of people that experience this, there's a lot of shame that comes with it. And I don't want to say that's not I'm saying this poorly, but it's like there shouldn't be shame in this. Like, is this is something that happens. So I also appreciate being able to work with my community partners and hopefully, like, even if they have a less traditional experience or a less traditional life path, and that's what's brought them to this work. I really, really appreciate having the opportunity to, hold them up. And, even if you don't have a PhD, you are still doing amazing work and you deserve to be at the table with all of these people who have a PhD. So, um, yeah, and for me, that's a big part of breaking down barriers that AVA does, is starting to interrogate, like, there's some assumptions in academia about worthiness based on whether you come from academia or community, and actually starting to be like, it can be tough, especially if you come from the more academic background, but it's so important that it's like, no, 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 some of these are very artificial and we need to challenge them. And yeah, I have no idea if I answered the question, but
You did. Yes,
okay.
definitely. Yes,
Okay.
I really enjoyed the way that you both were talking about. Yes, there are rewards when working with community, but also we have to be very cognizant of academia can have such a hierarchical mindset that, yeah, that as you mentioned, the two culture problem or the two world problem, that there is just, yeah, inherent biases and power imbalances among different faculties, different communities when we're trying to tackle a very pervasive issue that impacts everyone at some degree in their life. So, yeah, thank you so much for talking about that as well as the challenges, but also combating the challenges of like, no, sit down and listen to what community has to say, to what other faculties has to say to combat adversity and violence. Thank you so much, Kara. I appreciate it. Sarah, did you have anything that you would like to add about the rewards or challenges when it comes to doing this type of very high needs area, complex challenges in your career?
Yep. And we're looking at this through like the lens of community, right? And community engaged work and making sure I'm on the
Uh,
right question.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
ECRs in complex high
Yeah,
need areas. Yeah.
perfect. Sorry, I just wanted to double check that I'm not missing a piece. I think it's the most valuable work that we do. And I also think as an academic, it requires so much of you, but in the best way because you learn how to be a better academic. The moment you start sharing space and holding space with survivors, with folks who work in the community, with frontline staff, with all these organizations, you realize that academics are so used to being the loudest voice in the room, but they shouldn't be. And academics doing what academics do, which is oftentimes very exploitive. And it's very, you go and you take what you need, you leave, you publish because it advances your career. It sows these seeds of distrust with survivors, with community agencies, with folks outside of academia. And so I think one of the most valuable things AVA does, and also one of the most valuable things AVA helps people learn how to do, is to be an academic who's not a problem, where you're not just self-serving, you're not just focused on publishing or perishing, you're not just focused on climbing the hierarchy in the ivory tower, where you're like, this work matters, these are the impacts, this is why participatory action research and community-based work is so important. Or even if you expand it to like open, accessible knowledge mobilization activities like we do with the webinars, for example, that's where it really matters. But you have to be able to check the ego at the door that academia tells you you have to have, even when you feel like an imposter. And sitting and listening and learning from and with, and not trying to dictate the direction of. And so I think it's also that researching with versus researching on or researching about. And it's learning too that you have to do a lot of mending of bridges and relationship building before you even get to a point where you can do this work because so many people before you have done it wrong. And I know that's a harsh critique, but oftentimes you find, and I think it's the nature of academics and pressure to do the job, but it really matters and how you do it matters. And realizing you don't just hop into a community and be like, I'm going to do some research, who's working with me. You have I once talked to someone who said, I think you have to have 100 coffees, not like actually, but like that sort of metaphor of you sit, you talk so many times, you share space, you get to know each other. And then you move into that community engaged space as a trusted researcher and an ally and an accomplice. And that I think is where the power is and why it's so important. But it's not work that's easy to get into if you want to do it right. But I think it's also the most valuable thing I do.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for diving into, yeah, the big challenges of coming into community and trying to, yeah, there's been so many terrible things I've done in previous research that it's going to take so much time to unlearn and mending those bridges. And it's so important to build relation when it comes to doing research collaboratively in a community setting. So thank you so much for diving into past challenges, current challenges, and what we're doing moving forward to mend bridges and to do collaborative research that is equal for everyone in the conversation.
Um, I would say at the center of all of AVA's work is true engagement with community service providers and really doing policy and practice oriented research. In our area, that again, my area of research, that nexus between gender-based violence and early childhood adversity, community engagement isn't just an add-on. It's actually the core of what we do. It's a requirement for, as I say, ethical, useful work. So I approach community engaged research as a true partnership. So beginning by building trust, safety, aligning questions with community priorities. So often the research questions come directly from community, and ensuring reciprocity through accessible knowledge sharing and useful outputs. So not just those peer-reviewed publications, which are important, but other ways to disseminate and mobilize our information. So I would say the challenges in ECR is that true authentic relationship building and co-design and collaboration, they take time. These aren't things that can be rushed. And sometimes that doesn't always match with our academic timelines as well. So being mindful of that. And the most critical institutional supports, I would say, are protected time, and mid support for partnership, logistics, and honoraria. So again, doing all of those like system things that we aren't trained to do in our doctoral programs, even understanding the ethical processes to really do true community-based participatory work, and the recognition of community engagement in all of our outputs. I would say when institutions align incentives with partnership work, community engaged research can become much more meaningful and achievable. And I've learned how to do that through the AVA ECR program.
Thank you so much for diving in to kind of very similar things. So thank you talking about community and service at all. AVA very much values engagement with communities, service providers, and policy relevant work. How do you navigate community engaged or participatory research as an ECR? And kind of more interesting, because Sarah did cover this, what are some institutional supports that you found most critical for doing this well? Kara, would you mind starting us off?
I think I might have already answered that question.
That's true. I'm trying to think.
That's-
Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think. We did a little bit of two in one question.
yeah,
So,
I think I might have there might have been a question that I missed, so my apologies. But I think that I mean I didn't talk about institutional supports. Do we want to, as a group, expand on that? Is that okay? Um, so for me, some of the institutional supports, and I've been affiliated with a couple of universities. Some of them are very community oriented, some of them are not. So in terms of institutional supports, um, there are the basic things that are helpful for research, like having funds, having access to students, like student stipends. You can pay students for the work and things like that. I also really appreciate having someone in our research office whose job is partnership development, who's someone who, so some of the things that I've benefited from, they have a network of their own. So if you are starting to look into a certain area or something like that, they can start introducing you to people. You still have to listen. You still have to, do all the skills that we talked about. But it's kind of nice having someone who's already got like a space in the community or something, and they can introduce you to people, which is lovely. And they also help navigate, like we haven't really talked about it, but when you're working with partners, community partners, you also run into things like memorandums of understanding, data transfer agreements, security checks, conflict of interest discussions, and things like that. And having someone at the institution who can help you, especially when you're a ECR and you're still navigating some of this stuff, having someone at the institution that you can go to, or who can remind you that, yes, you need to have an MOU, and this is the headache that will happen if we jump through it, and here's some other options to get us along the way as well. Yeah, it would have been so much harder without that support. Um, and then lastly, one of the weird institutional supports that I'm appreciating more and more, it's not a traditional institutional support, but the institution's reputation in the community goes a long way as an institutional support. There are some institutions that, thank heavens, not mine, that have, unfortunately, because of some of the things that Sarah and Jennifer have talked about, do not have great reputations as a community partner. And unfortunately, your affiliation with that institution can go ahead of you sometimes and make people a little bit nervous about working with you. So having an institution that also, prioritizes, you can't really police academics because we're all independent entities, but trying to encourage proper relationship with community as a way to support their own institutional reputation is also a support that I really, really value. And yeah, if someone goes out of line, ideally having something within the community or the institution is going to deal with that. Yeah, I'll stop there. What about the rest of y'all?
yeah, I'm really curious to hear if anyone else has anything, any institutional supports or have either other supports that they found most critical in engaging with community or service providers, or even policy relevant work. Let jump in at any point.
I can quickly hop in and just add one thing because I echo everything Kara said. And being at a emerging university as opposed to established one, I run into, I think, a lot of barriers in terms of like, and I mean emerging in terms of research. We've been a teaching institution for a very long time. Um, it's it's a challenge and it's a struggle when those things aren't there, but it's also you can see it building and you can see hope for those institutional supports. But what I was going to say was I don't think it's a specific institutional support in general, but I think it's how academia as an institution as a whole operates, that there should be more support than there is for community-based research and for participatory action research. And for when I say outputs, I mean like publications and presentations and all these things that aren't necessarily those traditional peer-reviewed journal articles, where we need to create more space where if we're saying we're doing community-based research and our focus is on impact on community, then it should be recognized as an important marker in a career if what you're doing when you're publishing is you're publishing community-based resources. Because the last thing you want to do is you don't want to be like, okay, well, here's this academic journal article I wrote about this research that is behind a paywall, that is in language that isn't commonly accessible, that all these sorts of things, versus being like, I did all this amazing research, I funded all these things, and then here's all of these learning briefs and bulletins and webinars and things that came out of that. And I think there's a point where, and you're seeing the shift now, although it's not as recognized, but I think a bigger support that can happen across institutions is when you're looking at promotion or tenure, start to acknowledge the impact of stuff that isn't the traditional academic path, because that's important and it isn't always recognized.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, I guess we kind of combined two of the questions there. I guess I could just add a little bit of insight to this, like how we're talking about, like the community engagement. I'd say again that was very much like independent until connecting with AVA. So like a lot of these things were up to me, figure out what agencies could align, like for example, like I have support with MS Canada for the studies that I've been doing. I can advertise for recruitment on their research portal, and I think that that's great. But really connecting with AVA, I think AVA helped amplify that for me, and also on different grants where I've had directive with how to communicate to community agencies, how to connect with that. I'm hoping to do more policy related and more participatory action related, I guess, like initiatives as my program of research moves from that foundational stage where I can have more actionable outcomes based on the evidence, because I'm very much in a foundational stage with that. But again, I guess the more we're talking about it, I mean, I guess I sort of knew this coming in, but I again not being at a research intensive like institution, I'm at a research supportive institution, and I know that's a very unique thing to have. I mean, I did have to give up my spring. They don't have one here in Newfoundland. So it's like it's not without its sacrifices. But it is beautiful here. But it is you will see snow sometimes in June. And I'm from Southern Ontario, so that's a new thing for me. Back home, everyone's on jet skis and at the beach. So, so I have some some things I'm dealing with outside of academia, but when the institutional supports, I feel like this is something where building community. It's very much as an independent researcher. I feel like it's more independent in that action, but organizations like AVA can really help. Yeah.
I just
Uh,
wanted to, listening to this, I just wanted to throw out a thought that I had too, because we've been talking about institutional supports. One of the things that we've been thinking a little bit more at the Basca is not just institutional supports for the researcher, but if this is going to be a strategic priority for the institution, having supports for the community as well. So we've been talking a little bit. For example, McMaster has what they call a research shop, where it is a more integrated interface where you can develop partnerships with it's where they can come if organizations can come if they're looking for research or evaluation supports, or if they want like a business student to come in and write a business case for them or something. And it's a work integrated learning opportunity. We've been looking at, I do work looking at data management in the context of nonprofits. So can we provide our community partners access to our existing infrastructure and help them solve a problem that way? So it's part of what was been said by, Sarah and Jennifer again, that uh, it's in that spirit, like you want to be a good partner and also making sure that the institution is prioritizing giving back. So you're not just taking data, you're not just demanding resources, you're not just covering their salary, but there is a very clear benefit to a community partner approaching not just the researcher, but the institution. So we barely kind of do the supports for or recognize community work, as Sarah noted. But the next step would be if it was part of the institutional culture, and giving back was just part of the institutional culture as well.
Thank you so much, you three. I really appreciate the fulsome answers as well as adding, because I know we did combine a little bit of the questions because it does overlap so much about the work we do is community-based focus. I appreciate that we got a chance to kind of talk about some supports that individuals could reach out for when doing this type of work. I really appreciate it. And I really want to talk about successes in your ECR journey. So looking back so far, what would you describe was a key success, a turning point, or just a moment of validation in your ECR journey? And what really helped make that possible? So, Jennifer, would you be able to start with that? Or do you? Okay.
Sure. I feel like if I wasn't asked, I'm not the type person that would really ever go there. So if I'm turning red, like it's, I think, I don't know if it's embarrassment or humility or what it is. But yeah, I think it's like so very rarely we acknowledge our successes. And when I do, it's usually just like my partner or like a member of my research team. So thank you. I'd say that the biggest one for me is when MS Canada reached out and they said their patient partner group was interested in reading my work. So being able to like send a publication, and I guess I come from a different lens where yes, I'm a researcher, but I don't view that as an ivory tower like kind of position for me at all. I feel maybe as a background as a nurse, it's such a humbling job, and you're just it's really you it's that connection with humanity. So it's I feel like I'm in a very privileged position to be doing the research, but I've always said I'd be just as happy if someone else was doing this and advocating, with this patient population. So I think, yeah, getting that into the hands of like patients across the country was like a very exciting moment for me. It was validating. I mean, well, truthfully, they've never come back and said whether it's any good or not. But I think the fact that it got there was, that was very happy for me. I mean, they could think it's garbage, and that's okay too. But at least, it was nice. And I think too, I did mention like as an ECR, grant writing is a whole beast in its own. But you need funding to do research. Again, post COVID, like MS Canada, other organizations, funding got cut, priorities got shifted, and so it's like I find that maybe especially doing gendered based research, it can be harder to get a piece of that pie, and so getting successful grants has always made me so happy because then the research can happen, and again that's been so relational, like with the success of the teams and the people that I work with have really helped with that, but it's made me feel like, oh, I'm a real researcher. And I think sometimes maybe as a nurse in academia, we have not always had a seat at the table. Like I mean, we look at the trajectory of it being a female dominated in like a career, and it's something where we have not always had a seat at that table. So I think I'm grateful to be there, to be doing what I'm doing. And I'd say that's some of the biggest ones for the successes. Yeah.
First off, really glad to hear. And I think it's just been so wonderful to see more, as you mentioned, nurses at the table in these conversations, just talking in my own life. I know a lot of nurses that are doing their research that they're passionate about in their master's program. So it's just been really exciting to see especially with Nicole being nursing as well. I'm really glad to have these conversations. Let's go with Sarah. I want to really hear about those wins and the moments of validation in your ECR journey.
Um, I think I'm gonna sit here with Jennifer and be like, I never really think about the wins, let alone like tooting my own horn on wins. So this is a harder question to answer, but I think in that way it's also one of the more important ones because it makes us really reflect on what we've been able to accomplish. And I think for me, it's been a couple of things. So the Frida Center, I started there in 2013 and I started as a research assistant. I slowly moved up, and one of the cool wins for me has been since I'm able to get grants and since I'm able to produce and all these sorts of things with help from places like AVA and Nicole's work. And I was last year I was promoted to co-director, and the plan is that as my fellow co-director retires, I will assume the role of full director. And I think it's for me, it's both validating because that's been 13 years, but also that I am able to accomplish something like that quite early on in my career when I finished my PhD in 2021. That's something that I think people have to work for a very long time. But I also sit going, I've been doing it for 13 years, so it makes sense, but also it feels so new and weird because I'm at those early stages in my career. I think that's my biggest like win is getting to that point where I'm able to now lead research and lead a center and not just produce, and that's cool. The other thing that is a win for me is that the support for and the ability to do like knowledge mobilization work. I find knowledge mobilization and translation work to be, I think, the most important for me. I really, really appreciate and value public scholarship, and I do the other forms because I need to. But I think public scholarship's the most important thing. And so being able to be join a platform like AVA that lets me do that as part of my work is really cool. So running webinars, occasionally subbing in for podcasts, Alexandria, when you're not able, and also all the other grants that I've been on that do learning briefs and legal bulletins and trainings and being able to lead those things and be part of those things, it's life-giving for me in this work. So I think that's probably, aside from the title with my center, I think that's the biggest win is I'm able to shift into a space and have the support to do the work that I think really matters. And it takes a little while when you're an academic and when you're in early career to have enough, when I say like have enough cred, but you know what I mean? Like have enough, you're established enough now that when you say, no, this is what I do and this is why I do it, people listen. Like I have to defend myself a lot less that I do public scholarship as opposed to like the peer-reviewed things. And I don't know, I think it's a win just feeling like I stand on my own 2 feet now, which you spend so much of your career feeling like you don't.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm really glad to hear that shift. And obviously, change is really scary, but I think you're going to do a fabulous job when that time comes. So, thank you so much for talking about your wins. It's always exciting to hear. Last but not least, Kara, would you like to talk about some moments of validation in your early career, maybe even shifting into, I don't want to say middle career, but also right now?
Let's get honest, that's where I'm at, so it's fine. I did get a kick out of the comment though, like Sarah, as soon as you said that, I was like, the people here who have gotten feedback from me about writing letters or stuff for scholarship applications, I could hear myself shouting, brag, brag, brag. Like, don't, don't, none of this false modesty stuff. Like, you own what you brought to the table. Thank you very much. And it's a lot easier to encourage that in other people than in yourself. I am discovering. Um, I probably have a very similar response to what's already been said. I remember there was a moment when I got, my first big grant where I was doing my first independent project. And it was the community data work, which is also supported by what AVA does. And there was a moment where I've got my community partners, I've got an intern, I've got this design team that I'm overseeing, and it suddenly occurred to me that, oh crap, I'm running this show, and I don't know why anyone here is listening to me. Like I had that moment where it was like, oh wow, okay, I guess I'm here. I guess I've leadered my way into a leadership position. So it was a bit startling to realize that I had hit something that I had been aiming for a long time, and also then realizing and owning that, no, I can do this. Like I've got the skill set, I've got the training, I've got the mentors, I've got the team. It's there's a lot of responsibility when you first hit that, but it's like I can do this. And I know that I can do this. So for me, that was a really, really big win to suddenly realize that, oh, like all the stuff that I'd always attributed to the people that were more senior to me and my mentors, it's like, oh, I can look, I'm doing it too. Isn't this amazing? Um, and then one of the other wins that I think mostly came through for me for AVA, and this is going to sound like a weird one, but for most of my career, um, teaching was not my favorite thing, I will admit, because for me, teaching was getting up in front of a large group of mostly bored undergraduate students that are staring you down, and I'm incredibly introverted, and I've taught like that before, and I had like no energy for anything else. So, teaching for me didn't, for most of my graduate work, did not come with positive connotations because it was usually something that was incredibly painful. And a lot of my mentors just didn't value it and didn't speak to valuing it. And then I got attached to AVA Online, which is ironically uh, a teaching training curriculum. And it somehow having that opportunity to put together a knowledge mobilization platform or a training curriculum outside of the stress and expectations of academic teaching, first of all, it made me realize that maybe I've learned a thing or two more than I thought I had learned, which is always lovely. Um, but it also made me realize too that this is something that I appreciate doing. So not just the teaching, but the broader uh, like knowledge dissemination, but specifically in a context of something that's a bit more like a course. I realized that, oh, maybe this, maybe this isn't something that's on the side of my desk. Maybe this is something that I really do enjoy doing. So strangely enough, that was a win as well for me. I'll stop there.
I would say that one of the most valuable parts of the AVA ECR program is that it strengthened both my capacity to do research, but also my confidence to work in this space. It helped me to connect rigorous research with, like I said, trauma and equity-oriented practices. It helped me to embody a more integrative lens, again, looking at that nexus between ACEs and GBV, connecting that to inequalities and keeping prevention and real world impact at the forefront, in my view, at all times. It also encouraged strength and confidence in navigating some of those ethical and sometimes contentious and complex community engagement with the research and sort of trying to navigate both sides and systems that don't often align and speak well with one another. And I would say, just as importantly, it created a community of peers and mentors that helped to reduce that isolation. And I always have somebody to go to problem solve with the other ECRs that are incredible in this program. We've really developed quite a supportive network amongst ourselves. And I feel like just overall, the AVA ECR program has helped me to feel more prepared to navigate the complexities that come with research, whether that be methodologically, ethically, or from a relational perspective. Reflecting on specific impacts that the ECR program has had on me on my professional development, I would say that the teaching release has really, again, created space for sustained work on on parts of my research that required that uninterrupted deep focus. So again, providing more space for moving manuscripts forward, developing stronger grants, getting really right into those complex advanced analyses. So beyond the core outputs, I would say the program supported leadership and mentorship development. I've learned so much from Dr. Nicole Letourneau and everyone that's been involved in this process about how to supervise trainees more intentionally, what to focus on, how to build research processes that really put an emphasis on quality as well as I said, our own well-being. I would say it also expanded collaboration opportunities. This has really been critical for me. The opportunities, the connections that have come from this are honestly so many. I can't keep track of anymore. So joining other teams, being a part of other research projects, and this has been essential for me to develop that what I would like to think of as now a robust program of research. So AVA not only supported what I produce, but it also helped me to think about how I lead, how I mentor, and how I collaborate, and it has expanded my network immensely.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for sharing those wins or like that made you like make you go back and reflect like, no, I have the tools, the capacity, and now the motivation to keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm really glad to hear that like there is that interest to still disseminate knowledge through different pathways and different ways of knowing. So I really appreciate you all getting a chance to discuss those wins for yourselves. As we enter our last question of today's panel, I'm really curious about what advice you would give to an emerging or future ECR considering programs like the AVA teaching release? And secondly, what do you hope initiatives like this will achieve for ECRs over the next several years? Sarah, would you be able to start us off with this question?
I think advice for ECRs is both simple and complex at the same time. Take a breath and remember everyone has been where you are, and realize that even your colleagues who look the most put together still feel like they don't belong. They too believe they're imposters. They've just learned how to hide it better. And you'll also see too, like when you step in as an ECR, you have all these huge shifts in your life where you're no longer a student. You're the, like, not to say you're the teacher, but you know what I mean? You're no longer a student, you're like the teacher. You're the one you're leading things. You're having to develop your own research programs. You're no longer a research assistant, you're the researcher. Like you're no longer a teaching assistant, you are the educator. And all these sorts of shifts. And you become a valued voice at the table where not that you weren't before, but you have more credibility once you've like finished your studies, you're establishing yourself. And all of that, like feeling, learning how to get your own footing and to shift from that student mentality, like PhD student or candidate mentality, into being a faculty member and being a researcher and an educator. It's hard because you will sit there and be like, but I don't feel like I'm equipped for this. I don't feel like I'm ready. But you are. And it will feel chaotic and it will feel stressful. And who knows? In my first year, I cried on my office floor a couple times. And then I got up, dusted myself off, and kept going. And like you'll have those moments, and you find these pockets of things that make you feel good. I think Jennifer called them sparkly moments or something like that. That was beautifully said.
A glimmer.
Glimmer, yes. So I'm stealing that. Um, but it really is about realizing that everyone has been where you are. So you actually have this huge support system of people who can help you and who can guide you, who felt exactly how you're feeling. But it's also recognizing it's an incredible space of growth. So being an ECR, it feels chaotic, but it's chaotic because you're moving forward. If you were staying where you were comfortable or stagnant, you wouldn't have the chaos and you wouldn't have the fear, but you would not go anywhere. And so it's about sort of embracing that period and that space. And I think also it's about recognizing that there are the supports out there. So, like something like AVA, for example, where you can get involved and you're then around a whole bunch of people in a similar stage in a career. You also have mentors and you have this community of support. And even if it's not AVA, if it's something else, find yourself a community of people because it propels the ECR process to be able to collaborate, to have supports. And for me, one thing that also really helped was shifting my perspective from being like, I don't belong, I'm so scared of this, to being like, okay, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm getting my footing. Um, but I think finding a space or a community like Ava is one of the best things you can do because then you're not out there drowning on your own because academic work can be so isolating. And sorry, I know that was part of the question. Can you repeat the rest?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about initiatives like AVA, and what do you hope for these initiatives will achieve for ECRs over the next several years?
Perfect. Thank you. Um, so yeah, I think it's also about I think recognizing you're at the beginning and moving forward. But I think these initiatives like AVA are so important because it acknowledges that space of growth that ECRs are in. And it acknowledges that you need that community of support and you need those people and you still need mentors even though you're done because you're taught to believe like you're out the door. And so I think there's not only an important space for initiatives like AVA in the ECR program, but that it's needed and should probably be expanded. Because I speak for myself, and I think I probably also speak for Kara and Jennifer too, and our ECRs who aren't here also, with having a program like this creates support in a space where it's not always feeling supported and it propels your career forward. And so I think my argument for where it belongs is a lot more programs should have it. It should be a lot more readily available and a lot more supported. And so I think in that way, AVA is also kind of revolutionary, where it is pushing forward that support for people who are early in their career.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for talking about both a advice, but also the hope for initiatives like the AVA teaching release. Thank you so much. Jennifer, would you like to discuss anything about advice you give to emerging or future ECRs? And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, start as early as you can with your network. I would say don't go it alone. And don't be surprised when you graduate from like your graduate degree, whether you're doing a master's or a PhD, that your supervisor, you might not always be working with them. You're going to need other people in your network. They sort of, they're there to help launch you, but it shouldn't be like always and forever. You'll want to diversify that. So don't ever go it alone. Like even if you're doing, things like literature reviews, or you're going to conferences, connect with other people, work with others, try to diversify your teams. I would say like an opportunity like AVA, just run, jump at the chance for like teaching release. Your teaching will stress you out. Like I can promise you. We have so many unique challenges with that, with I think even a global phenomenon with some various things. So, but you'll find it rewarding too. But I think that, yeah, to get to your research, you want to work in partnership with others, including like an organization like AVA. Like what a great place to get, like, again, those relational connections, like Sarah was saying, and that mentorship. So you're transitioning, if you're going into like an ECR, like you're going into a huge transition, like that 5 years. If you're in a, say, like a tenure track or more, like it is going to truly be transformative, and you're going to have so many new experiences or curveballs that you're going to need to bounce those ideas. I'm a creative person, so we often work in partnership. Like you don't have John without Paul. You don't have Keith Richards without Mick Jagger. Not that I'm that cool by any means, but it's like I find my ideas form in partnership. My writing is only good in the rewriting process after it's been through the eyes of others. Like, I don't know if that says too much about me. Um, but yeah, and also when we come to partnerships, I think sometimes, with women too, we're all women that are speaking today, but I think it's something that, don't be also afraid to cut certain partnerships. Like if you're, say, going down one path with your ECR career with maybe a certain project, or something where maybe you thought you would work so well with someone else, and maybe there's different things going on, like they don't have the time or energy or capacity to give to a project maybe in a way that you had hoped. And don't be afraid to kind of say like, thank you, we can revisit this. And it sounds like such a small thing, but it is something that has, I think, really, again, saved my bandwidth. And when we talk about things like protecting our peace and well-being, I would say that, without getting into details, because it's never out of malice, that's been something that has protected a lot of my peace. And it's finding those right connections for you. Find your people, find your teams, diversify, shake them up. And it's like, yeah, getting that mentorship from, I never just have one person for that. I think AVA is a beautiful thing where it gives you multiple perspectives. And yeah, so I think that that's just like one piece of that pie, but definitely connect with others. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. If anyone's taking any thing from Jennifer today, don't be afraid to say no and protect your peace. And if you don't want to go down certain paths or teams, please, you can diverge. So thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, Kara, do you mind talking about some advice you give to future or emerging ECRs and other hopes for initiatives like the AVA teaching release for the next several years, how that's going to help ECRs going forward?
Um, well, so I can only speak to, I think that this is, programs like this are incredibly valuable, and I would encourage all ECRs to seek this out as much as possible. One of the challenges is that, learning doesn't stop just because you got your PhD or just because you got your independent position. There's always so much to learn. But strangely enough, carving out time to do that learning gets harder the further you go along, it feels like. So programs like this do give you the opportunity to, carve out that time. They're also an amazing, it's one of the, I guess it's a win. Now I'm thinking about all the wins now that that question is no longer here. But one of the wins too, or one of the perks is that, it's when they're asking you to plan your career as an ECR. I mean, I felt like I was basically guessing. Like I can predict, I guess, a direction, but that assumes that the collaborations come through, the grants come through, I've got enough seed money, whatever. So one of the things about being an ECR I'm discovering is that it's good to have a vision, but the opportunities they're going to become most fruitful, you can't predict them. So creating spaces where you can, what is it that I'm always forgetting that quote about how something about if you cultivate opportunities, then if you have a space where you're prepared for opportunities, you'll be better able to run with them when they present themselves. So I've always thought that's a big part of being an ECR. And I'll be open. I had no idea that I would ever end up on something like AVA if you had asked me as a postdoc or a graduate student. And it's been an amazing opportunity. Things don't always turn out the way you thought, and that's not bad. They could be even better if you run with opportunities and pivot, and depending on who you meet. And then I would also say here that I also value these, as I've said earlier, I also value programs like AVA's ECR program because not everyone is fortunate enough to be able to, continue working with a certain group of people, or things change, or, pivots change. This is another opportunity to have that cohort again, to have that mentorship again, which is always amazing. I've learned a ton about community-oriented, community-impacted research that wasn't part of my original training, so I really, really appreciated that. In terms of advice, well, sorry, I'm looking at my notes while I'm responding. Yeah, and it's also just good to have a group of people, as reiterating what Sarah was saying, talking about a bit too, is that transition to that other side from trainee to the person who's responsible for this stuff is really, really scary. And having some support while you're doing that is amazing. I now understand some of the decisions that my past mentors made, like being on this side of the fence. It's like, oh, I get it now. And sometimes with some of my trainees, I hear like my younger self come out of their mouth, and it's like, oh, okay, I now know where that comes from too. So a benefit from that is that you don't have to navigate that stuff alone, and you don't have to be, holy crap, I'm now in charge. How did this happen? On your own. And then the last thing I want to say too, just as a wrap up, is that I think one of the things that's come through a bit on this panel is that there's not always supports for people that aren't at like the R15s in a research position, but the work that everyone does at this table is incredible, major impact, really, really important to do. And programs like this kind of level the playing field a little bit more and provide support for people that, all this work needs to be at the table. All of these perspectives are really, really important, but the traditional academic support and trajectory doesn't necessarily make space or supports for this. And AVA's ECR programs and ones like it can help level that playing field.
So, thinking of what advice I would give to an emerging or future ECR considering a program like AVA, I would say AVA for me continues to be career changing. My advice to anyone who's, considering a program like this is to really approach it with a clear, realistic plan of what's possible. I would say focus on one or two areas that you really want to develop further expertise, and also identify some concrete deliverables. And with that, being really intentional about protecting the time that you're going to set aside to do that work. And I would say it would be helpful to treat your teaching release, like that time, like a structured project. So block off that time in your calendar for that deep work. Taking the initiative to schedule your own mentorship check-ins. Mentorship doesn't happen to you, it's something you create and seek out. I'd also say setting weekly goals so that time doesn't disappear into other urgent tasks. So it's really, again, time management and trying to get away from that time fragmentation. At least that's been my experience. As well, I'd encourage ECRs to use mentorship actively. So again, seek it out, come prepared with agendas, specific requests. Maybe that's feedback on a grant that you're working on, help with a publication, or looking at trying how to guide, navigating new partnerships, or even thinking about your workload decisions and distribution. And be thoughtful about commitments. So learn maybe from my own mistakes that early on in your career can involve so many asks, and you're almost afraid to say no. You're being pulled in so many directions. So just try to think about like what are meaningful service or equipment requests that kind of align, and will build either your research identity or are connected to your teaching. So you're kind of narrowing your niche either through your teaching, your service, and your research. And I think that's important because it's helping you to like scaffold your learning, you're building momentum rather than again that fragmentation. So I guess looking ahead, I hope initiatives like AVA's ECR program can really emphasize the importance of normalizing protected research time and also encouraging strong mentorship, not just as an add-on, but as an essential component for ECR success. I hope that they can also reduce the inequities who can thrive in academia by providing some of that structural support at probably arguably the most pivotal point in your career. So I hope that others explore this program and are able to benefit from the incredible mentorship and teaching release protected time that I was. Thank you. Please do reach out if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you all for talking about the advice and initiatives like the AVA ECR program. I really do appreciate it. I want to give everyone a chance to a round of applause. I hope everyone's clapping in the audience. Thank you so much for such insightful ideas and thoughts when it comes to the ECR. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to give everyone a chance to ask a question if there is. Use the Q&A function below. And you'll be able to watch this panel again with the addition of Dr. Ashley Stewart-Tefescu, the Triadic Mentorship Internship Committee Chair at the University of Manitoba as a assistant professor, to hear her perspectives as well of the ECR program. So feel free to watch this all again with another panelist. I would really appreciate it. Um, let's see. So everyone, thank you so much for joining the AVA webinar series. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you so much.